I was halfway through bolting the fourth panel onto the frame when I heard tires screech to a halt at the bottom of my gravel drive. I didn't even have to look. I knew it was her. Karen Rothman, self-declared queen of the Whispering Pines HOA, was out of her car before it stopped rolling. Clipboard in hand, phone already up to her ear. She didn't wave. She didn't ask. She didn't even look around. Just stormed up my property like she owned it. I'm reporting an illegal installation. Yes, right now. No visible permit, no HOA authorization, and he's modifying the structure. It's a violation of community code. I exhaled slowly, trying to keep my balance on the sloped roof. I glanced at my drill, then down at her, then back at the array of solar panels waiting for me to finish. She paced near the edge of my lot, shouting into her phone like it was a bullhorn. Her voice echoed through the trees, full of righteousness and self-importance. I climbed down the ladder calmly. No rush, no fear, because here's what Karen didn't know. I wasn't some naive newcomer putting up panels on a whim. I was the one who wrote the zoning code she was trying to weaponize. And in about 5 minutes, when the deputy showed up, she was going to find out exactly how much power she didn't have that I spent 20 years buried in the concrete veins of a city that never slept, working as the senior zoning advisor in the city's planning department. You'd be surprised how political a parking variance can get, or how many sleepless nights come from trying to protect green space while developers throw money at your desk. On paper, I was successful. I drafted land use policies that won regional awards. I testified at hearings, taught workshops, rewrote entire codes for underserved neighborhoods. But success doesn't mean peace. And over time, the work that once gave me purpose started to drain me. I wasn't sleeping. I wasn't eating right. I look out my 12th floor office window and wonder what it felt like to hear wind that wasn't being filtered through an air duct. Then my father died. Unexpected. Quietly, in his sleep, in a little house by the river I hadn't visited in years. At the funeral, I stood under an old pine tree he planted the year I was born. And for the first time in decades, I heard birds louder than traffic. I think that's when it clicked, what I was missing. Not just silence. Stillness. So I walked away. I cashed out what I could, packed light, and bought a parcel of land I'd quietly admired for years. 10 wooded acres tucked deep into Whispering Pines, untouched, unbothered, and just outside the city limits. No traffic, no meetings, no emails. Just forest, wind, and a narrow gravel path leading home. The cabin wasn't much at first, just bones and blueprints. But I built it with my own hands. Clear brush, hauled lumber. It took me 3 months just to get the floor leveled and the roof sealed before the first frost rolled in. And every day I worked, I felt something I hadn't felt in years, alive. The HOA was technically there, Whispering Pines Association, but they mostly sent out seasonal reminders to keep the fire lanes clear and once mailed me a flyer about bear safety. No dues, no patrols, just a dusty bulletin board at the old mail shed. It felt harmless. For a while, everything was harmless. Peaceful, even. Mornings meant coffee on the porch, wrapped in a wool blanket, watching mist rise off the pines. Afternoons were spent building, planting, sketching out plans to eventually go fully solar. My generator got me through the first winter, but I didn't want to depend on it forever. I wanted something cleaner, something permanent. The idea of living completely off-grid wasn't just about power. It was about control, about self-sufficiency, about building a life where no one could knock on my door and tell me what I was allowed to dream. So I designed a solar layout myself, calculated sunlight exposure, dug trenches by hand, scheduled delivery months in advance. Everything was ready. Everything was legal. Everything was mine. What I didn't know then, what I couldn't have known, was that my quiet dream had a silent neighbor, and she didn't like watching people build what she could never control. I first met Karen Rothman 3 weeks before the solar panels arrived. She came walking up my drive wearing a sun visor, tennis shoes that had never seen dirt, and an overly sweet smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. She had a clipboard in one hand and a reusable water bottle in the other, the kind with a floral decal that screamed, "I'm saving the planet, as long as it matches my aesthetic." "You must be new," she said, stopping just short of my porch steps. I stood with my work gloves tucked into my belt and nodded. Newish. Been here a few months. I'm Karen. I serve as president of the Whispering Pines HOA. Just doing my monthly walkthrough. Walkthrough? This wasn't a golf course. There were no sidewalks, no clubhouse. Most cabins were spaced out by at least an acre. But I nodded, polite but guarded. She didn't ask to come closer, but she did anyway, circling the cabin slowly, eyes flicking across my build like she was mentally measuring the distance between her expectations and my reality. I love what you're doing here, she said. Very rustic. Just be sure to review our architectural guidelines. You did submit an exterior modification request, right? I kept my expression calm. I'm outside the jurisdictional perimeter of the HOA's enforceable boundary. Lot 41C, unincorporated zone. Her smile faltered for half a second, then snapped back in place. Well, we like to keep the community cohesive. You know, property values, visual harmony, things like that. She left shortly after, but her presence lingered. That same evening, I found a neatly folded notice tucked into my mailbox. No name, no signature, just a typed message with bold lettering. Please be advised, all external modifications must be pre-approved by HOA board to comply with Whispering Pines community aesthetic policy. Failure to do so may result in fines or enforcement. Enforcement. I laughed out loud. The land wasn't under her jurisdiction. I had written the policy she was trying to misquote. But still, I responded in kind. A printed copy of the county map, highlighting my lot's exemption status. Annotated. Footnoted. Delivered with a sticky note that simply read, "Let me know if you'd like a walkthrough of the zoning overlays." I thought that would end it. I was wrong. The following week, the delivery truck carrying my first batch of solar mounting hardware was stopped at the main entrance. The driver called me, confused, saying a woman had flagged him down and told him he wasn't allowed to enter without clearance. I had to drive out, show the deed again, and apologize to a man who had just lost 2 hours of his schedule thanks to an imaginary authority checkpoint. I confronted Karen the next day, again politely. She denied it, of course. Said maybe it was a misunderstanding. "We've had issues with trespassers lately," she said. "Just trying to keep everyone safe." Safe. That word started to sound more and more like controlled. Things escalated. Tools began disappearing. Small things, my level, a spool of copper wire. Once I found my grounding rods twisted out of place like someone had deliberately tried to sabotage the site. I installed a trail cam near the edge of my lot. 2 days later, I caught her on camera. She wasn't stealing. She wasn't even touching anything. She was just watching, standing on the border of my property, clipboard in hand, staring in silence for nearly 7 minutes before walking away. No legal lines crossed, but every second of that footage screamed intention. I took it to the HOA board, presented it during their open comment session. Karen sat at the end of the table, sipping water, pretending to look bored. When I finished, she smiled faintly and said, "Just enjoying my evening walks." That was when I realized she wasn't just being difficult. She was being deliberate. She wanted to provoke me, wanted me to lash out, to make a mistake she could leverage. Instead, I doubled down on being rational. I wrote memos, submitted formal declarations, backed every document with a copy of the zoning code, the land use agreement, the renewable energy protection ordinances I had literally authored. Each time, she escalated. She started whispering to other board members at meetings, passing out flyers with exaggerated visual impact concerns. I overheard her once, cornering a new neighbor, warning them about how solar installations destroy resale value and attract the wrong type of people. The wrong type? I knew what she meant. Not criminals, just independent thinkers. Her grip on the board wasn't as ironclad as she thought, though. A few of the older members started asking real questions. One woman, Janet, approached me after a meeting and quietly asked, "Is it true you used to work in zoning?" I nodded. She said nothing else. But the next vote Karen called for, an emergency policy to limit non-traditional infrastructure, didn't pass. The cracks were forming. Still, Karen wasn't letting go. She started citing obscure bylaws, twisting language, hinting that even if I wasn't officially under HOA rules, I was part of the visual ecosystem of the community and thus subject to aesthetic cohesion expectations. Visual ecosystem. That was her way of saying she didn't like the look of solar panels in her rearview mirror. She never mentioned the code again. I think by then, she had an inkling that maybe, just maybe, the man she was trying to bury in paperwork and intimidation wasn't the amateur she assumed. But instead of retreating, she pushed harder. And on the morning my full solar array finally arrived, she decided to make her move. It was supposed to be a good day. The panels had arrived right on schedule. The sun was high. I had my tools laid out like instruments, ready to finish what I'd started months ago. I was up on the roof, securing the last of the mounting brackets, when I heard it, the sharp, familiar screech of tires on gravel. I didn't even flinch. Karen's white SUV came barreling down the road like a storm cloud in leather sandals. She slammed on the brakes, leapt out of the car, and marched straight onto my property like she'd rehearsed it in the mirror. Clipboard in one hand, phone in the other. "You, stop right now," she barked, pointing at me like I was committing a felony with my screwdriver. I stayed calm, came down the ladder slowly. "You're trespassing," I said evenly. "Back off the property. This is an illegal installation. You didn't get board approval," she screeched, waving her clipboard like it was a badge. "You are in direct violation of community code." She didn't even wait for a response. She pulled out her phone, dialed, and shouted, "911, yes. I'm reporting unauthorized construction. He's refusing to stop. I feel unsafe. Yes, it's aggressive and illegal." I stood there quietly. Let her dig the hole. 10 minutes later, a sheriff's cruiser rolled up. Deputy Marquez stepped out, mid-40s, seasoned, calm, the kind of guy who's seen more in a week than most people do in a year. He approached cautiously, hand resting near his belt. "Sir, we got a call about possible code violations. Mind telling me what's going on?" I didn't argue. I didn't explain. I reached into my binder, something I kept in my cabin at all times, and handed him a folder. Deed, site plan, and zoning exemption paperwork. You'll find my permit references in the back. It's all compliant with county regulations and renewable energy protection statutes. He flipped through it, stopped midway, looked up. "Wait a minute. You're—" "Yeah," I nodded. "Former city zoning consultant. I helped write Section 17B of the Renewable Energy Ordinances." Karen, who had been pacing in tight circles, froze. "What?" she stuttered. "I wrote the policy you keep misquoting," I said calmly. "The one that explicitly allows off-grid solar installations on independently zoned parcels, especially those outside HOA jurisdiction." The deputy turned to her. "Ma'am, unless you have a court order or a sheriff's directive, the one trespassing right now. This is his land, and he's within every legal right to install those panels." Karen's face drained of color. She tried to speak, but all that came out was a dry gasp of air. From across the road, a neighbor, Janet, watched from her porch. A few others had come out to see what the commotion was about. I saw a camera phone aimed at us from a parked car. Karen realized it too. She spun around, face flushed, and without another word, marched to her SUV and peeled off down the road like a teenager who'd been caught shoplifting. The deputy handed me back the paperwork. "If you ever run for office again," he said, "I'll vote for you." I smiled. But in that moment, it wasn't about winning. It was about being heard, finally, by someone who understood the difference between noise and law. And it wasn't over yet. Because Karen? She wasn't the type to lose quietly. I thought that once the sheriff clarified the law, Karen would back off. Maybe disappear quietly into her perfectly curated crafts room and lick her wounds. But I underestimated her pride. 2 days later, notices appeared in every mailbox along Whispering Pines Road. Bright red letters at the top screamed, "Emergency HOA meeting, zoning and structure enforcement vote." The agenda? A sudden push to regulate the visual impact of unapproved technologies. No doubt aimed squarely at me and my solar array. The wording was deliberately vague, filled with fear-mongering phrases like property value threat, neighborhood consistency, and my personal favorite, unchecked modification of rural identity. It was a Hail Mary attempt to change the rules mid-game. I hadn't intended to go. But when Janet knocked on my door and quietly said, "She's trying to use your panels as a wedge issue," I knew I couldn't let her rewrite the narrative. So I put on a clean shirt, printed a fresh stack of legal references, and walked into that meeting with the same calm I used to carry into city chambers. The community center was buzzing. Karen stood at the front, flanked by her usual yes men, clicking through a PowerPoint like she was leading a corporate seminar. Photos of my panels were blown up on screen, edited to look like they were blotting out the sun. She opened the floor for discussion, clearly expecting applause. I stood, and I spoke, quietly, clearly, and with no theatrics. I explained how my installation complied with both county and state law. I broke down HOA limitations, cited court precedents, and referenced the exact language in the local zoning ordinances. I wasn't there to argue. I was there to educate, and that scared her more than yelling ever could. I ended my statement with a single line. Rules don't exist to empower control. They exist to protect liberty. Silence followed. Then someone, an older man near the back, clapped once. Then again. The room shifted. Karen tried to regain control. She accused me of grandstanding, claimed I was sowing division. But the faces in the room told a different story. Exhaustion, discomfort. Some even looked embarrassed. Janet raised her hand and asked, "So, just to be clear, you're trying to ban solar power now?" Karen snapped something about aesthetics. Another resident muttered, "You banned my mailbox color last year. Maybe it's not the panels that are the problem." The motion failed. No ban, no new restrictions, and no more illusions about Karen's authority. Over the next few weeks, neighbors began stopping by. Some just waved. Some thanked me outright. One man offered to help me build a garden wall for the inverter system. Another asked for advice about installing his own solar setup. Karen stopped appearing on the HOA bulletin board. Her newsletter frequency dropped from weekly to once a month. When it came, it was short, cold, defeated. But I didn't feel victorious. Not really. I hadn't come here to start a movement. I came to disappear, to find peace. Instead, I became a symbol, whether I wanted to or not. And every time I looked at those panels gleaming in the sun, I wondered if I had traded solitude for something heavier. But then the wind would return. The silence would settle. And I'd remember, I didn't start this fight. I just refused to lose it. Karen wasn't finished, not entirely. After the failed emergency vote, she retreated from the spotlight. But behind the scenes, she was still scheming. I started hearing whispers from neighbors. She was trying to push through a bylaw amendment that would retroactively limit unsightly utilities, arguing that renewable structures should be subject to special review, even outside HOA jurisdiction. It was a long shot. It was also completely illegal. Still, she managed to get it onto the next meeting agenda under the name of Visual Environment Initiative. Classic Karen. Dress a power grab up in polite language. This time, I didn't just come prepared. I came backed by signatures. Over the next week, I spoke to neighbors, not as a rebel, but as a resource. I walked them through the actual zoning code, answered questions, even printed maps showing where the HOA's reach legally ended. I didn't raise my voice. I raised awareness. By the time the next meeting rolled around, Karen stood before a room that no longer feared her. What followed wasn't a debate. It was a reckoning. A quiet man named Bill, who'd lived on the hilltop lot for 20 years, stood up and read a petition. A formal call to remove Karen Rothman as HOA president, citing abuse of authority, repeated misapplication of community rules, and endangerment of neighbor relations. It passed with a clear majority. Just like that, Karen was gone. She didn't stay to argue. She didn't even collect her clipboard. She walked out of the building and never showed up to another meeting again. Her house was listed for sale within a month. Some said she moved closer to her daughter. Others said she couldn't stand the idea of being just another homeowner, no longer in charge. As for the HOA, it didn't crumble. It evolved. The board reorganized. Janet was elected president. Bill took over communications. And I, reluctantly at first, agreed to help draft a new set of legally sound, transparent bylaws. Not to control anyone, but to protect everyone. The irony wasn't lost on me. I had come here to get away from legislation, from endless codebooks and council votes. But in this quiet corner of the woods, my knowledge finally meant something. Not just as policy, but as empowerment. Today, my cabin stands fully solar-powered. The panels are humming. The battery wall is efficient. I don't need a generator anymore. I don't even need to be online most days. The gravel drive is quiet again. The wind sounds like it used to. Peace returned. Not because I forced it, but because I refused to surrender to fear or ignorance. I didn't need to scream. I didn't need to tear anything down. All I had to do was know the truth and wait for it to shine. Looking back, I never wanted to fight. I wanted stillness, simplicity, a life untouched by red tape and artificial authority. But sometimes, when people mistake silence for weakness, they come swinging with rules they barely understand. And sometimes they forget. The quietest man in the room might be the one who wrote the rules. Power, when unchecked, has a strange way of attracting the wrong kind of people. Not leaders, not protectors, controllers. People who confuse authority with ownership, who think volume is the same as value, who see silence as permission and rules as weapons. But here's the truth most of them never consider. The quiet ones? The ones minding their business, building something of their own? Sometimes they're not weak. Sometimes they're just watching. And when you try to come after them with rules you don't even understand, you might find out too late that you're not fighting a rebel. You're fighting the author. Karen never knew who I was because she never cared to ask. She judged the panels, the gravel, the quiet man with calloused hands, and assumed I could be pushed. But knowing your rights isn't about fighting loud. It's about standing still when someone demands you kneel. So let me leave you with this. Sometimes the person they try to bully is the one who wrote the rules. And now I want to ask you, have you ever been underestimated by someone who didn't know your story? Tell me in the comments. Because I've learned, there's nothing more satisfying than being underestimated, right before the truth lights up the whole room.